Whitmore mansion stood like a monument to wealth, a sprawling estate of marble halls, glittering chandeliers and echoing silence. It was the kind of house that seemed untouched by ordinary life, a place where appearances mattered more than truth. Behind its grand doors lived Richard Whitmore, a billionaire who had built an empire on sharp decisions and an iron will. His wife, Catherine, matched the mansion itself, elegant, polished and distant. Together they embodied privilege, their world carefully guarded from imperfection. But beneath the surface of this perfection, another story was unfolding. In the shadow of wealth lived Amara, a young black woman who worked as a maid in the Whitmore household. She was quiet, disciplined, and determined to go unnoticed. Every day she polished the silver until it shone, folded linens with care, and served at the table with practiced composure. She had long since learned to silence her own feelings, because feelings had no place in a house that reminded her, in subtle and not so subtle ways, that she did not belong. Amara was not treated cruelly, but she was never allowed to forget her place. Catherine's cool glances, Richard's detached tone, even the whispers of visiting guests all carried the same message. She was useful, but invisible. She accepted this silently, because she needed the job and because her world had taught her that survival sometimes meant swallowing your pride. Yet not everyone in the Whitmore home looked at her the same way. Ethan Whitmore, Richard and Catherine's only son, had returned home after finishing his studies. At 24, he was restless, his life mapped out by his father's expectations. Take over the business, maintain the family legacy, marry someone from the right circles. But Ethan had always felt suffocated by those plans. To him, the mansion felt more like a cage than a palace. It was within this cage that his gaze began to fall, again and again, on Amara. At first, it was small moments, noticing the quiet grace with which she moved, the determination in her eyes as she worked, the way she seemed to exist in a world apart from the glittering one around her. Where others looked past her, Ethan looked directly at her, and something inside him stirred. Amara felt it too, though she fought against it. She reminded herself daily that nothing good could come from his attention. She was a maid. He was the billionaire's son. More than that, she was black in a house where unspoken prejudice lingered in every corner. To even imagine anything more was dangerous. But the danger didn't stop the pull. Slowly, their paths began to cross more often. Ethan found reasons to linger in rooms where she worked, to ask questions that didn't need asking, to smile at her in ways that made her heart race. Amara tried to keep her distance, but the more she avoided him, the more he sought her out. And though no words of confession had yet been spoken, Amara knew the truth. Something had begun between them, fragile and forbidden. It was a spark that could grow into love or burn everything to ash. The days in the Whitmore mansion carried a rhythm of repetition. The clink of silver cutlery, the soft shuffle of maids across polished marble floors, the hushed tones of Catherine giving orders, the ever-present shadow of Richard's authority. Yet beneath that rhythm, Amara felt an unfamiliar beat growing stronger, the quiet, insistent pulse of a connection she couldn't deny. Ethan had become bolder. Where once his glances had been fleeting, now they lingered. Where once his words had been polite, now they carried warmth, even tenderness. He sought her out in the garden, in the hallways, in the library where the air smelled of leather and dust. Each encounter chipped away at the walls she had built to protect herself. Amara tried to tell herself that it was wrong. This was not her place, and Ethan was not hers to imagine. She reminded herself of the difference between them. His life was paved with wealth and privilege, while hers was stitched together with survival. But no reminder could erase the way her chest tightened when he smiled, or the way her thoughts drifted toward him in the quiet moments of the night. One afternoon, she was carrying folded linens through the long hallway when Ethan appeared at the far end. She froze, debating whether to retreat, but it was too late. He was already walking toward her, his expression unreadable. When he reached her, he didn't step aside, and the narrowness of the corridor forced her to stand close. For a long moment, they simply looked at one another. Amara's breath caught. She could hear her own heartbeat echoing in the silence. Ethan's eyes softened, and he spoke in a low voice. "You don't see yourself the way I see you." The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Amara opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. She shook her head as if to dismiss him, and hurried away before she could betray the emotions rising inside her. That night, Alone in her small room at the back of the mansion, Amara sat on the edge of her narrow bed. She pressed her hands together, whispering prayers for strength. She knew where this could lead, and it frightened her. A single mistake could ruin everything: her job, her safety, her dignity. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she saw only Ethan's face and the gentleness in his voice. Meanwhile, Ethan wrestled with his own thoughts. He knew what society, his parents, and the world expected of him. But for the first time, he felt he had found something real. Amara's quiet strength, her dignity despite hardship, her refusal to bend, these things drew him closer, like a flame calling a moth. He told himself he would not stop, even if it meant risking conflict with his family. The mansion, with its rigid rules and polished surfaces, had no place for love like theirs. But love rarely obeyed rules. It was already blooming, dangerous and undeniable, in the hidden corners of the Whitmore estate. And though Amara tried to silence her heart, summer arrived at the Whitmore estate with heavy air and long golden evenings. The gardens bloomed in fierce colors, and the mansion's windows caught the sun like fire. To the outside world, life inside was perfect, untouched by scandal or imperfection. But within those walls, a secret had taken root, one that grew stronger each day. Amara and Ethan could no longer pretend their connection was harmless. What had begun as fleeting glances and stolen words evolved into moments that blurred the boundaries of right and wrong. In the quiet corners of the library, their hands brushed, lingering longer than necessary. In the garden where roses climbed the stone walls, their voices softened into laughter that carried more intimacy than friendship. At night, when the mansion slept, Ethan sometimes sought her out, and those nights became impossible to forget. Amara had resisted at first. She told him it was madness, that nothing good could come from this. She reminded him of what people would say, of what his father would do if he ever discovered the truth. But Ethan had a way of wearing down her defenses, not with force but with persistence, with the kind of devotion she had never known. He told her she was not invisible. He told her she mattered. For a woman who had lived in the shadow of others all her life, those words felt like water in a desert. But love, when born in secret, grows tangled with fear. Amara carried that fear daily. She walked the mansion with careful steps, ensuring her face gave nothing away, that her voice betrayed no hint of the storm within her. Yet even as she tried to hide, she knew Catherine's sharp eyes were always watching. Richard, too, had a way of studying people as though he could strip them down to the truth with a glance. Every moment with Ethan was a gamble, and each gamble weighed heavier on her heart. The turning point came one night when Amara found herself staring at her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. Her hands rested against her stomach, and an unfamiliar dread tightened in her chest. It had been weeks since her last cycle. She closed her eyes, praying it was stress, fatigue, anything but the possibility that her life was about to change forever. But deep down she already knew the truth. Amara was carrying Ethan's child. The realization struck her with both terror and wonder. She imagined the scandal if anyone found out, the whispers, the judgment, the rage of Richard Whitmore, whose pride and name meant everything to him. She imagined losing her job, her home, perhaps even her safety. Yet in the same breath she thought of Ethan's smile, his hand reaching for hers, his whispered promises. Could love withstand the storm that was about to come? For the first time in her life, Amara felt both powerless and powerful. Powerless against the world that would condemn her, yet powerful in the knowledge that within her grew something no one could erase, a part of herself, a part of Ethan, a life born from love and defiance. And she knew the mansion's walls would not stay silent forever. The storm arrived not with thunder but with silence. For weeks, Amara had lived in fear that her secret would be discovered. She had grown quieter, her movements slower, her gaze fixed more often on the ground. The other staff noticed, whispering behind her back, and Catherine's sharp eyes narrowed whenever Amara entered the room. But it was Richard who saw the truth first. It happened in the dining room, on a morning that began like any other. The long oak table gleamed under the chandelier, and Catherine sipped her tea in perfect posture while Richard read the financial pages. Amara entered to pour the coffee, her hands steady though her stomach turned with unease. As she leaned forward to set the pot down, Richard's gaze shifted to her face, then to the subtle swell of her belly. His eyes narrowed, calculating. "Leave the coffee," he said curtly, his voice a blade. Amara froze but obeyed, setting the pot down before stepping back. Richard folded his newspaper slowly, deliberately, as if giving weight to the silence that filled the room. Catherine looked from her husband to Amara, confusion flickering into suspicion. Richard stood, his height casting a long shadow across the table. He studied Amara with cold, unyielding eyes. "You've shamed this house," he said at last, his tone low and dangerous. "I knew there was something about you, pretending to be pure, to be quiet. But you're nothing more than filth. A woman like you doesn't belong here." The words pierced Amara, but she kept her lips pressed together. To defend herself would be useless. Richard's judgment had already been passed. Catherine's face twisted in horror as realization dawned. "Richard, you don't mean—" "She's carrying someone's child," Richard cut in. His jaw tightened, his voice rising. "And I have no doubt what kind of woman she truly is. This is what people like her do. They take advantage. They corrupt, they drag names into the mud. You will leave this house today. Do you hear me, today?" Amara's throat burned, but still she said nothing. She thought of Ethan, of the truth she could reveal. That it was his son, his heir, who had crossed the line, not her. But she couldn't bring herself to expose him. Not like this, not with rage thick in the air. She stood silently, hands trembling, tears threatening, but held back. Then, just as Richard's fury reached its peak, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. Ethan entered, his eyes scanning the room, immediately sensing the tension. His gaze fell on Amara, then on his father. "What's happening?" Ethan demanded. Richard turned to him, his voice sharp. "This woman is finished here. She's disgraced herself, and I will not have her under my roof another day." Ethan's eyes widened, realization crashing over him. He stepped forward, placing himself between Amara and his father. His voice, steady but fierce, broke the silence. "No, father. This isn't what you think. This child—" He glanced back at Amara, then squared his shoulders. "Is mine." The room seemed to freeze, the air too heavy to breathe. Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard's face turned crimson with fury. Amara closed her eyes, the weight of truth finally crashing down. The mansion had broken its silence at last. The words hung in the air like shattered glass. "This child is mine." Ethan's voice still echoed through the grand dining room, and in its wake silence roared louder than any storm. Catherine sat frozen, her teacup trembling in her hand. Amara stood behind him, her heart pounding, torn between fear and relief. And Richard Whitmore, the man who controlled empires, looked at his son as though the world had betrayed him. "You dare stand here," Richard hissed, his voice shaking with rage, "and claim her in my house, with my name hanging over you like a crown? Do you understand what you've done?" Ethan met his father's eyes without flinching. "Yes, I understand. I love her. And if she leaves, I'll go with her." The words hit Catherine like a blow. She clutched her chest, whispering, "Ethan, you can't mean this." She isn't, but she stopped herself, unable to say the word that burned on her tongue. "Not like us." Richard slammed his hand against the table, the sound reverberating through the room. "You fool! Do you know what people will say? Do you know what this will do to us? She is not your equal, Ethan. She is not one of us. She is—" He stopped, choking on the venom he wanted to release, his face red with fury. But Ethan's voice cut through his father's rage. "She's human. She's a woman. She's the one I love. And no amount of money or reputation will change that." Amara's breath caught. She had never asked him to fight for her, never imagined he would. She had braced herself for abandonment, for betrayal. Yet here he was, standing firm in front of his father, shielding her with words sharper than any sword. Richard's face twisted with disgust. "You've thrown away your future, our name, our bloodline, all for this." His hand trembled as he pointed toward Amara, as if she were nothing but a stain on the marble floor. But Ethan didn't waver. He reached back, took Amara's hand, and pulled her to his side. For the first time, Amara did not shrink. She stood tall, her chin lifted, her dark eyes steady. The truth was no longer hidden, and she would not cower in its light. The silence stretched until Catherine spoke, her voice weak but piercing. "Richard, if you cast them out, you lose Ethan too. Is that the legacy you want? A fortune with no heir? A mansion with no laughter?" Richard's breath came heavy. Pride battled with fear, tradition against love. The walls of the mansion seemed to close in on him. The weight of his empire suddenly fragile, At last his shoulders sagged, the fire in his eyes dimming to weary embers. "Do as you wish," he said, his voice gravel. "But know this, the world will not forgive. And neither will I." He turned away, his footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving the room in stunned quiet. Ethan squeezed Amara's hand. She looked at him, eyes brimming with tears and of fear, of relief, of hope. Against all odds, she had not been silenced. Against all power, their love had survived.